Miss Bennett, you're hired. You'll serve as Director of Community Lending, with a starting salary of $120,000. Meredith Caldwell pushed the contract across the polished wooden desk. Zora Bennett could not move. She was a black woman from East Akron, dressed in borrowed clothes, being offered a position she had never applied for. Her hands, still cracked from the floor cleaner she had used the night before, remained frozen in her lap. They were seated on the 41st floor of a Manhattan tower, surrounded by white marble, glass walls, and white faces in tailored suits. "Ma'am, I think there's been a mistake," Zora said. "I never sent a resume. I hadn't even heard of this company before you called me." Meredith's expression softened. "You may not have known the company, but I learned about you after you helped my father." Zora still could not understand how one quiet act of kindness, offered to a stranger in the rain without expecting anything in return, had brought her into that room. Before everything changed, late one evening, Zora dipped her mop into a bucket for what felt like the 1,000th time. Her shoulders ached. Her lower back burned. Her right shoe, patched with electrical tape weeks earlier, made a wet, squelching sound with every step along the third-floor hallway of St. Catherine's Hospital. A doctor passed without looking at her. A nurse stepped over the mop without saying a word. To most people in the hospital, Zora was part of the furniture, a black woman in a gray uniform, invisible by design. She had stopped taking it personally. She kept mopping because mopping paid the rent, and the rent was due soon. "Bennett," a familiar voice called from behind her. Bernice Lawson, her supervisor, stood at the end of the hall with reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. She was a black woman in her mid-50s who had cleaned those floors for decades and could read a person's heart in a single glance. "Baby, you've been here since the beginning of your shift," Bernice said. "You've worked a punishing double shift. Go home." Zora rested both hands on the mop handle. "I picked up Patrice's shift. Her boy has a fever again. Patrice's boy seems to be sick all the time. Girl, people are taking advantage of you." Zora gave her a tired smile. $11.40 an hour, Mrs. Lawson. A double shift means I can make the rent. I can't afford pride." Bernice moved closer and lowered her voice. "Zora, listen to me. You don't belong behind this mop forever. You've got a sharp mind, and you've got a heart that actually sees people. One day, somebody is going to see you in return. You hear me?" Zora laughed softly and glanced at the tape around her shoe. "Mrs. Lawson, the only thing my sharp mind is doing tonight is figuring out how to make $14 last until my next paycheck." Bernice did not laugh. She simply studied Zora for another moment, shook her head, and walked away. By the time Zora finally clocked out, the last bus had stopped running. That meant a long walk home in the freezing rain, in shoes held together by tape. She walked past boarded-up storefronts, past the liquor store with the broken neon sign, past Mabel's Diner on Maple Street, where warm yellow light spilled onto the wet sidewalk, and the smell of coffee leaked through the door cracks. Her stomach growled. She had eaten nothing but a small granola bar earlier in the day. $14.20 was all she had left until payday. A cup of coffee cost $2.50. She could afford that. After a punishing double shift, she told herself she deserved at least something warm. Zora pushed open the diner door, and the bell above it jingled. Mabel looked up from behind the counter. She was a heavy-set white woman in her 60s who knew Zora by face, by name, and by struggle. "The usual, sweetheart?" Mabel asked. "Just coffee tonight, Miss Mabel." That was when Zora noticed the old white man sitting alone in a corner booth. He looked to be around 70. An old army field jacket hung from his thin shoulders, soaked through by the rain. His white hair was damp, and his hands trembled as he counted the coins scattered across the laminated table. 83 cents. An empty coffee cup sat beside them. A small bowl of crackers from the free basket rested near his elbow, and an aging military duffel bag sat at his feet. It was the kind of bag that had not been issued in decades. Mabel spoke gently, but Zora heard every word. "Sir, you've been here for hours. I'm sorry, but I have to ask you to leave." The man nodded. I understand, ma'am. I'm sorry to be a bother. He gathered the coins with shaking hands, and 2 pennies rolled onto the floor. He bent down to pick them up, and the coughing started. Wet, deep, the kind of cough that lives in the lungs. Zora watched him. She thought of her father, who had served, who had died of pneumonia in a Veterans Affairs hospital years earlier, who had once told her, "Baby, the worst thing in this world is to fight for a country that forgets you." Zora thought about the $14.20 in her wallet, Janelle's inhaler, and the rent. Then she walked to the counter, pulled out every dollar she had, and placed it on the formica. "Miss Mabel, please bring him hot coffee, chicken soup, and toast." Mabel looked down at the money. "Honey, the total is $18.40. You're $4 short." "I'll owe you," Zora said. "I'll bring the rest on payday." Mabel stared at her for a long moment, then nodded and picked up the bills as though they weighed more than paper. The old man looked around in confusion, trying to understand who had paid for him. Mabel tilted her head toward Zora, who pretended to be studying the menu on the wall. The man slowly rose from the booth and walked over. "Ma'am, I can't accept this. I have nothing to give you in return." Zora faced him. "You already gave something. You served this country. That's enough for me." She motioned toward the booth. "Sit down and eat while it's hot." He hesitated. Pride flickered across his weathered face, the kind of pride that had probably carried him through things Zora could not imagine. Then his shoulders lowered, and he nodded. He returned to the booth and ate slowly, like a man who had forgotten the taste of hot food. Zora stood at the counter and sipped a glass of water. She watched him from the corner of her eye. She did not ask his name or his story. She simply made sure he finished every spoonful of soup. When he was done, he stood up, gathered his duffel bag, and walked toward the door. He nodded at her once, a soldier's nod, full of dignity, and stepped out into the rain. Zora watched him through the fogged window. He didn't walk away. He stood under the awning, coughing into his sleeve. Then he pulled a key from his pocket, a rusted truck key, and looked across the street. An old Ford pickup, rust on the wheel wells, cardboard taped over a broken passenger window. Through the windshield, she could see a folded blanket on the driver's seat. He lived in that truck. Zora stared. The rain was hammering down. The temperature had dropped to 38 degrees, and he was about to sleep in a metal box with a broken window. Zora considered it only for a moment. Then she pushed open the door and ran into the rain. "Sir, wait." He turned in surprise. "You can't sleep in that truck tonight. You'll get pneumonia. You could die out here." "Ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but I'm used to it." Zora stepped closer. "My apartment isn't far from here. You can sleep on the couch, stay for one night, and when morning comes, you can go wherever you need to go." He stared at her as though she had grown a second head. "You don't even know my name. I don't need to know your name. I only need to know that you're not going to die tonight." He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "Why?" Zora wiped the rain from her face. "Because somebody's son or daughter may be hoping you make it through this night, and I can't be the person who walks past." He gave no answer, but he followed her. They crossed East Akron together through the freezing rain. He stayed a few steps behind, careful not to crowd her, and coughed almost the entire way. Zora did not turn around, but whenever the coughing grew worse, she slowed her pace. At last they reached her building, a faded brick walk-up with a broken intercom. She unlocked the front door and led him up the narrow stairs. Her right shoe made a sad, wet sound on every step. Zora opened the apartment door. The place was small, with one bedroom and a pull-out couch in the living room. Her teenage sister, Janelle, was already asleep, breathing with the soft wheeze of the asthma she had carried since early childhood. The refrigerator was covered with overdue notices for the rent, electricity, and pharmacy. One bill showed that Janelle's inhaler would cost $84 to refill, an amount Zora could not possibly pay at that moment. A single work shoe sat on the kitchen table, waiting to be repaired. The old man saw everything. His jaw tightened. "Ma'am," he said softly, I can't stay here. You don't have enough for yourself." Zora was already pulling a folded blanket from the closet. "Mister, I have a couch, a roof, and a heater that works. Tonight, that makes me the rich person in this room. Sit down." She prepared the couch, brought him a glass of water, and gave him the last couple of cough drops from her purse. Then she whispered to Janelle, who stirred without fully waking, and guided her into the bedroom they would share. Before closing the door, Zora turned back. "What's your name, sir?" "Silas," he answered. "Get some sleep, Silas. The bathroom is the door on the left if you need it." Zora closed the bedroom door. Silas remained on the couch in the darkness, holding the glass of water between both hands. He had not slept indoors in many months. As he looked at the overdue notices on the refrigerator, his hands began to shake again, but this time the cold had nothing to do with it. Silas lay on the pull-out couch, staring at the water-stained ceiling while the rain struck the window. He was warmer than he had been in many months, and should have fallen into a deep sleep, but he could not. Deep in the night, a violent cough pulled him upright. He swung his legs over the side of the couch and quietly made his way toward the kitchen for water, trying not to wake anyone. He did not need to be quiet. Zora was already awake. She sat alone at the small kitchen table in the dark, with a jar of loose change in front of her, an open spiral notebook, and a pencil in her hand. She had not heard Silas approach. He stopped in the hallway and watched as she counted the coins, arranged them into tiny stacks, wrote figures in the notebook, crossed them out, and tried again. Her lips moved silently as she calculated. Then she dropped the pencil, pressed both hands to her face, and her shoulders started to shake. She didn't cry loudly. Silas knew this kind of crying, the kind you do when you've been crying alone for so long, you've forgotten how to make sound. The kind where you hold your own mouth shut so a sleeping child in the next room doesn't hear you breaking. He heard her whisper, barely, $84 for Janelle's inhaler, $200 for rent. Almost no time left. Lord, what am I supposed to do? Silas stepped back into the hallway. He didn't want her to know he'd seen. He sat down on the couch. The blanket smelled like cheap detergent and a child's bedroom. The water glass trembled in his hand. Silas thought about his daughter, Meredith, and the last time he had seen her at his wife's funeral years earlier. He remembered the words he had thrown at her. You were too caught up in your career. You neglected your family. You did not even come home to see your mother one last time. Then he remembered Meredith's answer. You never told me Mom was that sick. He had been right about some things. Meredith had been right about others, and both of them had been terribly wrong. They had not spoken since. Pride had cost them years. It had left Silas with a truck, a duffel bag, and the fading memory of what a warm couch felt like. From the kitchen came the sound of Zora's broken breathing. This black woman, a stranger who had not even known his name earlier, had given him her dinner, her coat, her couch, and the last $14 in her wallet. She knew nothing about him, and she had almost nothing left to give. Yet she had given anyway. Something opened inside Silas Caldwell in that dark apartment in East Akron. He removed his worn wallet. Inside were $47 in cash, a Purple Heart he had kept hidden for decades, a photograph of his late wife holding Meredith as a young girl on her first day of school, and a folded scrap of paper. The paper held a telephone number with a Manhattan area code. Silas had written it down years earlier and had never called it. His hands shook as he stared at the digits. For too long, his pride had been larger than his love. He had told himself Meredith did not want him, and that he did not need her. But inside a stranger's living room, while a woman with almost nothing cried over coins for her sick sister, Silas finally understood. Pride does not pay the rent. Pride does not refill an inhaler. Pride does not save a stranger. Love can. He folded the paper carefully and returned it to the wallet. When morning came, he would make the call he had owed his daughter for years. Before dawn, Zora slipped quietly from the bedroom and tiptoed past the couch, where Silas was finally asleep. I was truly asleep, resting with the deep stillness of a man who had not been safe or warm in far too long. Zora left a handwritten note on the kitchen counter. Mr. Silas, there is hot oatmeal on the stove. Please lock the door when you leave. Stay safe. Zora. She put on her taped shoe and stepped into the cold morning, pulling her thin sweater tightly around herself. She had given Silas her only coat. After walking several blocks toward the bus stop, she suddenly stopped. An image from the kitchen table returned to her mind. A worn leather wallet had been sitting beside the salt shaker. Silas must have set it down before falling asleep, and she had been too rushed to notice it properly. Zora turned and ran back through the rain. When she reached the building, Silas was already leaving through the front door with his duffel bag over one shoulder and her note folded in his hand. He had not yet realized the wallet was gone. "Silas, wait!" She hurried after him and caught up farther down the street, breathless and soaked. Zora held out the wallet. She did not know it contained $47, a Purple Heart, a photograph of a young girl named Meredith, and a folded Manhattan telephone number. "You left this on my kitchen table." Silas stared at the wallet, then at Zora's face, and then back at the wallet. His chest rose and fell beneath the wet jacket. "Did you open it?" he asked. "It wasn't mine to open. It's yours." Silas took the wallet slowly, as if it weighed much more than leather and paper. He opened it and checked the contents himself. The $47 remained untouched. The Purple Heart was untouched. Meredith's photograph was still there, and the folded telephone number had never been opened. Silas looked up at Zora, at the tape around her shoe, and at the rain running from her uniform. She would be late for work, and lateness meant losing pay. "Zora," he said quietly, "why didn't you keep the money?" She blinked, genuinely confused by the question. "Why would I keep something that doesn't belong to me?" She gave him a small wave, turned, and ran toward the bus stop. A moment later, she disappeared into the gray Akron morning. Silas stayed on the wet sidewalk, holding the wallet and watching her go. He remembered Zora's shoulders trembling above the jar of coins. He remembered the overdue notices on the refrigerator. He thought about how a woman with so little had run through the rain to return a wallet she had never opened. His hands shook. The folded telephone number inside suddenly felt impossibly heavy. Silas walked until he found an old payphone outside a gas station. It was scratched and weathered, but somehow still worked. He stared at it for a long moment before reaching into his pocket. He had only 2 quarters left, the final coins not already reserved in his mind for a future cup of coffee. He dropped them into the slot. Silas dialed from memory. After years of pretending he had forgotten the number, he discovered that he still knew every digit by heart. The line rang once, then again. "Hello." The voice on the other end was older and more tired than he remembered, but it was hers. Silas closed his eyes against the rain. "Meredith, it's Dad." A long and terrible silence followed. He thought she might hang up. He almost ended the call himself. Then a quiet voice said, "Dad." Silas's own voice broke. He had not expected that. "I know I don't have the right to call. I haven't earned it. But Meredith, I'm not calling for myself. There's a young black woman in Akron. She found me in the rain. She fed me, gave me her couch, and spent her last $14 to make sure I ate. Then she ran through the rain to return my wallet without opening it. Meredith, she's drowning. Her sister is sick. She cannot afford the medicine, and she may lose her apartment. I have nothing I can give her, but you do. Please, I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you to help her." The silence lasted long enough to carry the weight of all the years between them. Then Meredith Caldwell, Chief Executive Officer of Northbridge Holdings, a seasoned executive who had not cried in a boardroom in decades, released a sound that was almost a laugh and almost a sob. "Dad, where are you? I'm coming to get you." Later, while Zora was cleaning another hospital bathroom, her telephone buzzed in her pocket. The number was from Manhattan. "Hello, is this Zora Bennett?" "Yes, my name is Meredith Caldwell. My father ate breakfast at your apartment, and you returned his wallet to him in the rain. I would like to send a car for you in the morning. There is no obligation. I would simply like to speak with you in person." Zora nearly dropped the telephone. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. Who are you? I'm Silas's daughter. Please come. I'll explain everything when you arrive. The call ended. Zora sat on the edge of the bathtub and searched Meredith's name online. The first result was a Forbes profile. Zora stopped breathing. The following morning, a black Lincoln sedan pulled up in front of her apartment building, and nearly everyone on the street watched. Janelle pressed her face against the window while clutching her inhaler. Later, dressed in a blouse borrowed from a downstairs neighbor, Zora rode a private elevator to the 41st floor of a Manhattan tower. The receptionist, white, polished, unsmiling, led her down a marble corridor. Glass walls, rows of people in suits typing on slim laptops. Nobody looked at her, or rather, they all looked at her and pretended they weren't. The receptionist opened a heavy oak door. Meredith Caldwell stood up from behind a massive desk. Meredith had gray-streaked hair, no makeup, and a simple gray suit that probably cost more than Zora earned in a year. There was no assistant and no attorney in the room. Only Meredith, and beside her, Silas, now wearing a clean blazer with his purple heart pinned to the lapel. Zora froze in the doorway. Silas stood, his eyes already wet. "Hello, Zora." She could not speak. Meredith gestured toward the chair across from her desk. "Please sit. We have a great deal to discuss, and most of it begins with a wallet you chose not to open." What followed felt unreal to Zora. Meredith explained the company, the position, the salary, and the training she would receive. Silas sat beside her and, at one point, held Zora's hand between both of his. He said nothing because words were not enough. Soon afterward, Zora sat at a desk on the 38th floor with a small placard bearing her name and title. Zora Bennett, Associate Community Lending. During her first break, she called Bernice from a glass-walled room overlooking Manhattan. "Mrs. Lawson, I quit the hospital," she said. "But I think this is the good kind of quitting." Bernice's voice cracked over the telephone. "Baby, I told you somebody was going to see you in return." The days that followed moved like a fever dream. Zora's signing bonus reached her account. Janelle's inhaler was refilled, and the overdue notices disappeared from the refrigerator one by one. Zora bought a pair of plain black work shoes, no tape required, and threw the old pair in the dumpster behind the building. She still struggled to sleep. It felt too good, too fast, like a bill was coming due that she couldn't see yet. Before long, she'd started learning spreadsheets, loan documentation, the basics of underwriting for borrowers without traditional credit histories. Her training mentor was a quiet, older woman named Evelyn, who treated Zora exactly like any other new employee. There was no pity and no exaggerated kindness, only clear expectations and honest work. Derek Harlan, a man sitting 2 desks away, behaved differently. One afternoon, he brought Zora a cup of coffee and smiled. "I heard you came into the company through an unusual path." His tone sounded friendly, and his smile reached his eyes. But something about the way he said unusual, the small pause before the word, made the back of Zora's neck cool. She thanked him. He walked away. She sat at her desk for a long moment, staring at the coffee. She didn't drink it. During the days that followed, while Janelle slept peacefully for the first time in a long while, Zora lay awake in her own bed and thought, "Something's coming." She did not know what was coming, but Silas's words from her first days at the company circled through her mind like a warning. "Watch the quiet ones, Zora. Loud people tell you who they are. Quiet people make you learn the hard way." The blow came not long after she started. Zora had barely settled at her desk with a cup of tea when her work telephone announced a new internal message. It was real tea this time, not Derek's coffee. The message came from Graham Voss, Director of Human Resources. The subject line announced a mandatory onboarding review and procedural compliance meeting. Zora's stomach tightened. She had never met Graham. She knew him only from his polished photograph in the corporate directory. The directory described him as a longtime human resources director. Zora had no idea why he wanted to see her or what procedural compliance meant in her case. She would find out very soon. Graham's glass-walled office sat on the 39th floor, directly between Zora's department and Meredith's executive suite. Glass walls, a white orchid on the desk, a framed Yale law diploma on the wall. Even though he was not a lawyer, he stood when she walked in, tall in his late 40s, gray suit, salt and pepper hair cut sharp. He had the kind of smile that practiced itself in mirrors. "Miss Bennett, please sit." She sat. He did not sit immediately. He walked around to the window first, hands clasped behind his back, looking out at Manhattan as if he were a man about to deliver bad news he secretly enjoyed. "I want to start by saying I think your story is remarkable, truly. The compassion you showed Mr. Caldwell was exceptional." He turned. "But unfortunately, the board's compliance committee has raised some concerns about your hiring." Zora's hands went cold. "What kind of concerns?" He sat down, opened a manila folder, and laid it across the desk like a card dealer. Inside sat a single page with her name on it. No resume, no transcripts, no reference letters, no background check. "There is no documentation for your hire, Miss Bennett. No application, no interview record, no background screening. From a compliance standpoint, your employment is, how should I put this, irregular." "Mrs. Caldwell hired me directly," Zora said. "She told me." Graham interrupted her. "Mrs. Caldwell is currently flying to Singapore and will be unreachable for several days." His smile widened by the smallest amount. "While she is away, the board has asked me to follow standard protocol, both for your protection and for the company's." He slid a second document across the desk. The printed form was titled, "Acknowledgement of Suspended Status." Graham tapped it with one finger. "This only confirms that your employment is under review while we verify compliance. It is a formality. I will also need your key card until the process is finished. It may take several days, perhaps longer." Zora stared at the paper. Her name was already typed at the top, and the date had already been entered. It was the current date. Graham had prepared everything before Zora entered the room. She looked up. "Why are you doing this?" His smile flickered, revealing something colder beneath it. "Doing what, Miss Bennett?" "Following the rules. I would think that you, of all people, would understand the importance of fairness." He pushed the form closer and offered her a pen. Zora took the pen and held it above the signature line for a long moment. Then she signed. Soon afterward, she rode the elevator toward the lobby with a small cardboard box in her arms. Inside were a stapler, a notepad, and the placard reading Zora Bennett, Associate Community Lending. Her keycard was gone. The lanyard no longer hung around her neck. The plain black work shoes she had bought only days earlier suddenly felt too clean for her feet. In the elevator mirror, a black woman in a borrowed blouse stared back at her with wet eyes, holding a cardboard box. For one brief and hopeful stretch, Zora had believed she was climbing a ladder. Now she understood that she had been standing on a trap door. The elevator doors opened into the lobby. Derek, the friendly man who had brought her coffee, stood near the security desk talking with a guard. He glanced up and saw Zora carrying the box. Then he looked away too quickly. In that single moment, she understood. He had never been trying to welcome her. He had been watching and reporting. The small pause before he called her path unusual had not been awkwardness. It had been a warning. Graham had not acted alone. She walked out of the lobby into the cold Manhattan afternoon, holding her box. She did not tell Janelle right away. She did not know how. Instead, she sat in her bedroom that night with the door closed, staring at the new bedspread Janelle had picked out at Target only days earlier. The bedspread was light blue with tiny daisies, and as Zora stared at it, the room seemed to close around her. Her telephone buzzed. A message from Silas appeared. "I'm coming to your place. I'll be there soon." Zora did not ask how he knew. Somehow, he simply did. Silas arrived in his clean blazer, without the Purple Heart this time, looking like an exhausted old man who had finally found somewhere to belong. Janelle hugged him at the door. She had already decided that Silas was now her honorary grandfather. Silas sat across from Zora at the same kitchen table where he had once watched her count coins and cry. "Tell me everything," he said. Zora did. She repeated every word Graham had spoken, described the empty folder, the prepared suspension form, Derek's presence in the lobby, the surrendered key card, and the box she had carried out. When she finished, Silas remained very quiet. He studied his hands before speaking in a voice Zora had never heard from him. "They're playing an old game on you." "What game?" "The one where they make you believe you never deserved the chair you were already sitting in. I believe they've done this to other women before you. I'd bet my pension on it." "Silas, Meredith hired me. Graham can't just—" "He already did," Silas said, and he chose his moment carefully. He waited until Meredith was on a plane. That isn't a man following rules. That's a man hunting. Something shifted inside Zora. It was not despair. It was the beginning of anger, steadied by clarity. "What do I do?" Silas held her gaze for a long moment. His jaw tightened the way Zora imagined it had tightened when he was a young soldier and the world around him was burning. "You don't do anything yet." Silas stood and reached for his coat. "I'm going to make some calls. There are things Meredith and I haven't told each other in years. But there is one thing I know about Graham Voss." He paused at the door. "I've heard that name before. A long time ago. Back when my wife was dying, the door closed behind him." Zora sat at the table alone in the dark, the cardboard box at her feet. Outside, somewhere across the city, an old soldier was walking back into a war he had been avoiding for years. Silas did not go home. He drove to a diner in Queens that stayed open through the night, ordered black coffee, and started making phone calls. The first call was to a man named Rafael Ortiz, who had worked as a security consultant for Northbridge Holdings until his retirement years earlier. Rafael had also served multiple tours in the same unit as Silas decades earlier. Some debts never expire. When Rafael answered, his surprise was immediate. "Silas Caldwell, I haven't heard your voice since the funeral." "Rafael, I need a favor, and I need it handled quietly." Before the night ended, Silas had a list of names. 2 black women had been hired into junior positions at Northbridge and dismissed soon after starting under nearly identical circumstances. Both terminations had been signed off by Graham Voss, citing the same boilerplate language about procedural compliance. One of the women, Simone Ellis, lived in the Bronx. The other, Rochelle Grant, had moved back to Atlanta after her firing and now worked as a paralegal at a small firm there. Silas called both women soon afterward. Silas did not introduce himself as a homeless veteran who had recently been sleeping in a truck. He introduced himself as the father of Northbridge's chief executive officer. Both women began crying almost as soon as they heard why he was calling. Their stories matched nearly word for word. An empty personnel folder, a prepared form with the date already entered, a courteous smile, a demand for the keycard, a cardboard box carried down in the elevator. Silas wrote it all down in the small notebook he had not used since his wife was alive. While Silas was working the phones, Bernice Lawson was working her second job. Bernice cleaned offices several nights each week to supplement her hospital salary, and one of her regular accounts was a midtown law firm called Mercer & Vaughn. She had been pushing a vacuum past Graham Voss's preferred attorney's office for a long time. People in suits did not see the woman with the vacuum. People in suits left things on printers, in recycle bins, on the corners of desks where coffee cups had been carelessly set down. Bernice had not paid attention before because she had no reason to. She had a reason now. Zora had called her crying after the firing, and Bernice, who had cleaned hospital floors for decades and read souls in single glances, had said only one thing. "Baby, hold on," Bernice had told her. "People who think we're invisible always forget what we can see." Soon afterward, while cleaning a midtown law office, Bernice found a printed email inside a recycling bin beside an attorney's desk. Graham had sent it when Zora was hired. The subject line read, "Damage Control, Bennett Situation." The body of the email was 3 short paragraphs about how Meredith's hire of Zora had been impulsive, how it set a dangerous precedent for future cultural fit issues, and how the attorney should help draft language that would allow a quiet, defensible termination once Meredith was traveling. The email was copied to one other person. The other recipient was Derek Harlan, a mid-level analyst on the community lending floor. Bernice folded the email twice, placed it inside her cleaning jacket, and continued vacuuming until her shift ended. The following morning, Silas sat in the living room of Arthur Caldwell, Meredith's husband. Arthur was a retired civil rights attorney who had spent decades suing companies for the same kind of discrimination Graham was using against Zora. Arthur was in his 70s, gray-bearded, half-deaf in one ear and entirely undimmed. Silas told him everything: the 2 prior firings, the pattern, Simone Ellis, Rochelle Grant, Bernice's email. Arthur listened without interrupting. When Silas finished, Arthur set down his coffee cup and said quietly, "Silas, I have wondered for years why the human resources turnover rate skewed so heavily in one direction. I think we just answered the question." Then Arthur paused, opened a folder on his desk, and slid an old printed file toward Silas. "Before we go further, there is something else I want you to see. I pulled this after you called. Graham Voss's personnel file from his early years at the company. Graham had begun at Northbridge as Meredith's executive assistant." Arthur tapped the printed dates. "Look at them, Silas. Look at the dates." Silas read the page, and his hand went still. The period matched the months when his wife had been dying. "Arthur," he said slowly, "are you telling me what I think you're telling me?" Arthur met his eyes. "I'm telling you that you and Meredith lost each other for a reason neither of you ever understood. And the man targeting Zora may be the same person who stood between you and your daughter all along." Silas leaned back. The room became completely quiet. For the first time in years, the old soldier began to cry. When the decisive meeting arrived, Graham gathered everyone inside a conference room on the 41st floor. He had arranged the meeting himself and timed every detail. Meredith was not expected to return until later. Graham intended to have Zora's termination signed, witnessed, and filed before she came back. The paperwork would be archived across 3 internal systems, allowing him to tell Meredith that the matter had already been, in his favorite phrase, fully resolved. He sat at the head of the long mahogany table in a charcoal suit, hands folded, the polished smile already in place. To his right sat 2 compliance officers, both white, both junior, both holding pens that Graham had personally placed in front of them. To his left sat Derek Harlan, eyes fixed carefully on the table. The door opened a moment later. Zora walked in alone. She wore the same borrowed blouse from her first days at the company. She carried no folder, no notes, no lawyer, just her 2 empty hands folded in front of her. She sat in the chair Graham had assigned her at the far end of the table. Graham allowed himself the smallest of smiles. "Miss Bennett, thank you for coming. As I explained, your hiring bypassed standard procedure. The compliance committee has reviewed the situation, and we are recommending termination with a generous severance package in order to avoid unnecessary reputational damage." Graham stopped in the middle of the sentence. The elevator at the far wall chimed, and its doors opened. Meredith Caldwell entered the conference room much earlier than Graham had expected. Her gray hair was windblown, and she still wore her overcoat. In one hand, she carried a small brown paper bag from a diner, folded shut with a receipt stapled to the top. Silas walked behind her in a clean blazer, his Purple Heart pinned above his heart. Arthur Caldwell followed with a leather portfolio tucked under one arm. The room became perfectly still. Graham's smile failed for a full second before he managed to rebuild it. "Mrs. Caldwell, we weren't expecting you." Meredith did not slow down. "I changed my flight and landed before dawn," she said calmly. She walked the length of the table without looking at Graham and stopped beside Zora's chair. She set the small paper bag on the table directly in front of Zora. "Continue, Graham. You were saying something about reputational damage." Graham cleared his throat. "Mrs. Caldwell, I think it would be best if we had this discussion privately." "No," Meredith said. "I believe it is best to discuss this here, now, and in front of witnesses." Meredith reached into the paper bag and removed a wrinkled receipt. She held it between 2 fingers. This receipt came from Mabel's Diner on Maple Street in Akron, Ohio. The total is $18.40. It was issued several weeks ago. The handwriting at the bottom belongs to the owner. It says, "Paid in full by stranger." Meredith placed the receipt on the table. "My father carried this in his wallet for weeks. The woman who paid the bill did not even have enough money to cover the entire amount. She promised the owner she would repay the difference on payday. That same woman then took my father into her home. She gave him her dinner. She gave him her coat and her couch. When he accidentally left his wallet behind, she ran through the rain to return it without ever opening it. Inside was $47 in cash, almost exactly what she needed to refill her sister's asthma inhaler. She did not take the money. She did not even look. Meredith turned slowly toward Graham. Do you know what character looks like when it appears on paper? I do. And I also know what its opposite looks like. Arthur stepped forward and placed one folder on the table, followed by a second and a third. Meredith opened the first. Simone Ellis, hired through my diversity initiative and dismissed by you shortly after she began for a supposed procedural irregularity. Rochelle Grant, hired during an earlier recruiting period. You dismissed her soon after she started, using the same claim of procedural irregularity. Then there is Zora Bennett, hired by me on my father's recommendation, and suspended by you almost immediately for the same reason. Meredith closed the folder. 3 black women, 3 nearly identical forms, 3 dates entered before the meetings took place. The same sentence appears at the bottom of every document, repeated word for word. Arthur opened the second folder and read slowly. In the interest of cultural fit and long-term institutional alignment, the employee acknowledges that her continued presence is not in the best interest of the organization. He looked directly at Graham. That is your sentence. The document metadata shows that you created it, and you used the exact language 3 times. Graham opened his mouth, but Meredith raised one hand. I'm not finished. She opened the third folder. Her fingers trembled for a moment before becoming steady again. Graham, you joined Northbridge as my executive assistant years ago. During your early years here, you controlled my personal telephone, email, and calendar. You decided which messages reached me and which disappeared. You decided which calls I returned and which ones I never knew had come. My mother died of pancreatic cancer years ago. During her final days, my father called this office 41 times. He left messages, sent emails, and repeatedly asked me to come home. I never received a single message. For years, I believed my father had not bothered to call me. For years, he believed I had chosen my career over my mother's deathbed. Silas closed his eyes. Recently, my husband recovered the archived call records. 41 incoming calls came from my father's number, and every one of them was forwarded to your extension. None of them were ever logged in my call records. None of them were ever returned. The conference room was silent. You did not just discriminate against 3 black women, Graham. You stole the last days of my mother's life from her family. You spent many years watching me believe I was the daughter who failed her, and you said nothing. You were the silence between my father and me. Meredith set the folder down. Your employment is terminated immediately. Your access has already been revoked, and security is waiting outside. Arthur has submitted a referral to the New York State Bar Association concerning the falsified compliance documents. He has also submitted a separate ethics complaint to the Society for Human Resource Management concerning the 3 discriminatory terminations. You will not work in human resources again. She turned to Derek Harlan, who had not lifted his eyes from the table. Mr. Harlan, you are also terminated for cause. Arthur has the email. Graham stood up. He tried to speak. The 2 security officers at the door took one step inside the room. Meredith looked at him with the same calm voice she had used at the very beginning. She had $14, Meredith said. She spent almost all of it to feed my father. That is character. You had power, money, access, and every opportunity to do what was right, Graham. You gave this company and this family nothing but harm. Security escorted Graham and Derek from the room. When the door closed, Meredith turned toward Zora, who had not spoken throughout the entire meeting. Her eyes were full, and her hands remained folded in her lap. Meredith smiled for the first time that morning. Now, let's talk about your real job. Meredith sat down across from Zora. The conference room, which only moments earlier had felt like a battlefield, felt suddenly small and almost domestic. Silas pulled out the chair beside Zora and sat. Arthur stood by the window, arms folded, watching Manhattan as the morning light moved across the glass. Zora, Meredith began. "I don't promote people out of guilt. I promote them because the evidence shows what they're capable of. You have operated a kind of community lending system in your own neighborhood for years. You helped people stretch paychecks, find resources, protect their children, and survive emergencies. You simply never received a salary for it. From now on, you will." She slid a folder across the table. Zora opened it slowly. The contract named her director of the Northbridge First Hand Initiative, a new micro-lending division for borrowers without traditional credit histories. She would receive a budget and choose a team of 9 people during the launch. The starting salary made Zora's hand tremble against the page. "Northbridge First Hand was your father's idea," Meredith said softly to Silas. "He told me about it after you returned his wallet. He said the woman who walked through freezing rain to take a stranger home was exactly the kind of person who should help decide who deserves a fair loan in this country." Silas looked at Zora. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Zora's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out with a hand that still would not stop shaking. A photo from Janelle, a small bright examination room in Akron, a specialist's office. Janelle was sitting on the edge of the exam table, smiling shyly, holding a brand new spirometer in her lap. A kind-looking pediatric pulmonologist stood beside Janelle with one hand resting gently on her shoulder. A message appeared beneath the photograph. "Sister, Dr. Reynolds says my lungs are going to be okay. He says that with the right medicine, I may not always need an inhaler. I'm going to be okay, sis. For real this time." Then a second message appeared. "I'm okay. For the first time in my whole life, I'm actually okay." Zora pressed the phone to her chest. She closed her eyes. She did not let herself cry in front of Meredith, but Meredith, who had raised one daughter and buried one mother, knew enough to look politely toward the window for a moment. Much later, on a cold morning, Zora walked into Mabel's diner on Maple Street wearing a tailored navy coat. The bell above the door jingled. Mabel looked up from behind the counter and smiled the kind of smile that needed no words. Zora ordered coffee and toast and paid the full bill. Then she placed a folded $20 bill on the formica. "Miss Mabel, the next person who comes through that door cold and hungry, whoever they are, please use this for them." Outside, rain had begun to fall again. The bell rang once more. Somewhere else, a man in a parking lot held a door for a stranger pushing a stroller. At a grocery checkout, a woman quietly paid for the elderly customer behind her and left before he could turn around. On a city bus, a teenage boy stood and offered his seat to an exhausted construction worker. Neither of them said a word. On a Cleveland sidewalk, a young black girl removed her own scarf and placed it in the hands of a homeless man before walking away without looking back. None of these moments were filmed. Most of the people involved were never thanked. Yet kindness has a way of traveling beyond the moment in which it is given. Somebody is changed by it, and sometimes that person carries it forward. Real kindness is rarely loud or showy. It does not need an audience, and it carries no hidden bargain. It is the choice to give what you can, even when you feel empty, without demanding praise, recognition, or repayment. Zora did not help Silas because she knew his daughter was powerful. She helped him when he looked like a forgotten stranger with nothing to offer her. That is what made her choice meaningful. Her generosity did not erase her own hardship, but it reminded Silas that love was still possible. It brought a father and daughter back into the same room. It exposed people who had confused power with worth. It gave other women a chance to tell the truth. And eventually, it allowed Zora to build opportunities for people who had spent their lives being overlooked. Kindness does not mean ignoring danger or giving more than is safe. It means refusing to let hardship make us blind to another person's humanity. Sometimes kindness is a meal. Sometimes it is returning a wallet, making a telephone call, preserving an email, listening to someone who has been dismissed, or standing beside a person when a powerful room wants them to disappear. These choices may look small, but small choices can become the first link in a chain that changes several lives. The story also reminds us that good intentions must be joined with responsibility. Meredith's gratitude opened a door for Zora, But gratitude alone could not protect her from discrimination, hidden behind polished language and corporate procedure. The truth came out because Silas asked questions, Bernice paid attention, Simone and Rochelle found the courage to speak, Arthur examined the records, and Meredith accepted the painful facts about her own company. Change required more than sympathy. It required people to act. Graham and Derek made choices as well, and those choices had consequences. Accountability was not cruelty. It was the necessary recognition that using power to diminish others causes real harm. Forgiveness may become possible with honesty, remorse, and repair. But forgiveness should never be used to erase responsibility or silence the people who were hurt. Silas lost years with his daughter because pride and manipulation kept both of them from reaching across the distance. His call did not restore everything at once, but it began with humility. He admitted that he had been wrong. He asked for help, not for himself, but for someone who had shown him mercy. That first honest step opened the way toward reconciliation. Zora's life did not change because kindness was a trick for earning a reward. It changed because character eventually became visible to people willing to recognize it. The reward was never guaranteed, and that is why her goodness mattered. She acted when no one was watching, and when she believed nothing would come back to her. So be generous when you can, careful when you must, and honest in every choice. Notice the people others overlook. Speak when silence protects unfairness. Return what is not yours. Keep your promises. Give second chances without abandoning good judgment. Remember that a person's clothing, job, neighborhood, or bank account cannot tell you the value of their heart. You may never know where one quiet act will lead. The person you help may simply make it safely through the night, and that alone is enough. Or that person may carry your kindness into another home, another office, another life. Either way, choose to be the kind of person who does what is right, even when no applause is coming, because quiet, honest kindness is never truly wasted.